Welcome to the Ashby Room. This week, I'm joined by two leaders in the retail space, Shelby Greeley and Stephanie Doiron. Shelby is a senior product manager at Levi Strauss, focused on using AI for demand forecasting and pricing. Stephanie is the VP of Retail and Commerce at Clare V, a direct-to-consumer brand that specializes in handbags and apparel. We get in the weeds about building a successful career in the retail space, the practical applications of AI, and the application process for Berkeley Haas School of Business. Without further ado, please enjoy this pleasant conversation with Stephanie and Shelby. The discussion in class today was pretty interesting when it got into the retail side, talking about inventory management and forecasting. And I remember our discussion in LeadCom, it was all about forecasting using AI and how it's all different now. And I thought it'd be kind of interesting to have both of you on, since you do kind of different things in retail. So thank you so much for getting on here. Let's do some intros first. So Shelby, maybe you want to introduce yourself
first. Sure.
Maybe a little closer to.
Okay. So my background, I've been in the retail space for a decade, but started out on more the commercial operations side of the business. So focused on international franchise and like true retail management. And I think it was such a great crash course because you got to see every step of the process, from buying the products to marketing the products, the visual merchandising in the store, how that shows up online and digital. So it was a lot of fun. And a couple years into my career, I moved into digital expansion, still focusing on international markets, and mainly Asia Pacific was like my core region. And so we were setting up kind of our .com sites for the first time. So again, full end-to-end, what does that look like? How do you do that? And how do we need to show up differently for different consumers around the world? It's not just like that cookie cutter experience. So I learned a ton. I've kind of been in the digital space since then, and different roles related to digital operations and then more strategy and analytics. And then about 2 years ago, I went through a Python boot camp, just because I was like, how do I really double down on the analytics part of this to answer some hard questions? And I transitioned into a product management role. First focus on pricing and promotions and optimization around that. And then now focus on demand forecasting and inventory management. So
There's so much to drill down there. I think we connected off the analytics part, the AI part at LeadCom. And then Stephanie, I remember when you told me where you work, and I was bringing it up to friends, coworkers, like my wife, and it's like, oh yeah, I know that company. And then we had a couple of the evening weekend people over last night at the Ashby Room, the actual Ashby Room, and they were like, Clare V?
So cool.
Do you want to go into a bit about what you do at Clare V, what the company is, and do that first.
Yeah, so Clare V is a startup handbag company. We were handbags and accessories. Now we're getting into apparel, or we have the last few years. And Clare founded the company in 2008, so we're celebrating our 15-year anniversary this year. Wow. With a book with Rizzoli. We're very excited about it. And I've been with the company for 7 years. And I started there as the director of e-commerce, and I was overseeing just the website. And then as the company grew, I grew with the company. So then I took on our stores as a channel, and now I'm overseeing all of direct-to-consumer. And we don't have a tech team because we're a small startup. So I also am kind of our head of product management, although none of that's an official title, but I'm working on revamping our tech stack with external partners. So
I was talking to Shelby about, I'm not really sure exactly what your responsibilities are at Clare V. Like,
I think I said everything.
It's
a lot.
Like you have P&L.
Yeah.
It's like you're also doing digital transformation and all those other things.
Yeah.
What would a day in a life look like for you, or maybe a week?
Yeah, a week is probably better. It's a lot of switching. What's the term for that?
Task switching.
Yeah, a lot of task switching, a lot of like pause, walk, take a bathroom break, come back, switch to the next thing. So, the team is absolutely amazing that I work with. And so they really are independent contributors and of themselves are managing their own worlds. So on the e-com side, I'm working on things with our product manager there around like site experience, UX improvements to conversion rate optimization, all the classic e-commerce business driving initiatives. On the stores front, I'm working on sourcing new store locations, market research with our president and our founder. We just went to Denver a few weeks ago. We'll go to Boston soon. I work on just acquiring all of our new stores, so handling the leases and negotiations and everything. And then, on the tech side, that's probably a good third or 40% of my effort right now is working on our tech stack and revamping all the systems. So we're on the systems we could afford when we were small, and now we need to pretty much uproot and change everything. So it's a lot of vendor research and requirements gathering and all the classic product management tasks.
What's the organization size right now? Like the footprint and the people count, I guess.
Yeah, people count, we're up to like 150-ish.
Oh, wow. That's bigger than I would have thought.
Yeah, we'll be opening our 14th store this year. So, and then we're 80% direct to consumer, 20% B2B. So partners like Nordstrom and Anthropologie.
Maybe to drill down a bit further into Clare V, I was talking about how my friends, coworkers all know the brand. All the women know the brand. Mm-hmm. Why do you think you guys were so successful, first of all?
It's Clare. I mean, I've worked with a few different founders at this point in my career. She's the third, and she's unique. She's a special person. She's smart. She's calm. She's kind. She has literally built the business through blood, sweat, and tears, one trunk show at a time. So things that she did in day one, year one, like inviting a bunch of women over to her house to sell them handbags. We still do that today. Those are called trunk shows. Today we go to a new city, we find a host that would be a great brand advocate, and then we have them invite all of their friends, and then we will send an email campaign out to our local audience in the area and bring together existing customers with the host's guests and just have a great time selling bags to a bunch of women. And that spreads word of mouth in that area. And so that's something we do when we look ahead at future cities. Like we really want to have a store in Austin. So every year we're trying to do trunk shows in Austin, as an example. Other than that, it's social media has been huge. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's the classics of today's business. You know, Claire is very active on her channel. She knows a lot of people. And so she in her own network is connecting people to the brand. But it's changed a lot. I have to say, like, having been there 7 years, it felt like a much more niche brand 7 years ago. And now, and I see this mostly through our customer service team and the kind of feedback that we get from customers. Now we're starting to reach the Nordstrom customers and the Madewell customers and the larger retail customers who are hearing about us through social media. And their first experience with us is an Instagram ad. And then they found out we had a store in Seattle. So they pop into the store and then they have the brand experience in person. And now they're a repeat customer. So it's like that story times, 57,000 this year. That's our new customer count.
As much as a quality product it is, there's really a half of it is the marketing side, and
absolutely
not just like product market fit, but like getting the word out there. These new tactics, trunk show, or what'd you call it?
Trunk show,
and social media, all that. Anybody trying to get into retail, it's like there's a new way to go about it to break through, right? Mm-hmm. And also like you mentioned, the Nordstrom customer is a little different. When I go to the gym in the morning, I see a different demographic that I would not identify with waiting in line for Macy's to open because it's attached to a mall. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, I cannot identify with this customer type. Like there's definitely niches out there that are underserved, I think. Mm-hmm. And Macy's is such an old business model, right?
Yeah.
Like we were talking about in class. Mm-hmm. Can you, Shelby, maybe, you brought up some good points about Macy's. Can you talk about that discussion we had around demand forecasting, I think it was?
Sure. Yeah. I think, one, Macy's has been around forever. And I think they're actually like innovative in their own way. So being at Levi's, and even in my past, I've worked at Tory Burch and J. Crew, both more DTC brands. Levi's is the first like really true wholesale brand where that drives the majority of our business, and we're expanding into DTC, which is funny. But after 150 years, we decided we want to own more of that story and the consumer experience related to that. But places like a Macy's or a Kohl's or Nordstrom play such important roles for so many brands. And that's really where you reach such a wide variety of consumers, to your point. I think they all have different business models too. So I think like what we were talking about in class is like what kind of gives one a competitive edge over another from a forecasting side. And it just comes down to like the teeniest little things. I think it's a problem that's really hard to solve. And I think sometimes when you see these like stories in a press article, it touches on maybe one point, but if you actually get into those organizations, I couldn't even tell you how they do that successfully, right? It's very nuanced. But you have to kind of pull each little lever however you can.
Yeah, I think Brian was trying to say, I don't think of Macy's as a like industry. It's not necessarily. They don't necessarily have their finger on the pulse because they're a little older. But maybe they do. Maybe, to stay in business, they have that.
Yeah. One of the cool things, I mean, not Macy's, but you think about then a competitor like a Kohl's, for example. From the outside, it may not look like they're super innovative. But then, like, as an example with Kohl's, a couple years ago, they created a partnership with Amazon, right? With Amazon Returns at Kohl's. And the whole purpose of that is this is one of our largest competitors. But actually, how do we benefit from all of this real estate that we own and drive traffic into our stores? And what they found, I think, in a bunch of the articles I read and having worked with that partner is there's a lot of new customers coming in. They drop off their return, they see something else, and they make a purchase. That's innovative. They also just launched a partnership with Sephora in certain doors, right? Yeah. Macy's has been doing some of those same things as well. And so what I think has been interesting is there's this perception that they're kind of old school and not innovating. But actually, I would say it's kind of to the contrary of that. Maybe they're slow and steady, but they're definitely innovating. Like right now, it's kind of like, you fight or die. So it's been kind of interesting to watch from afar.
Yeah, and I think acquisition in today's retail landscape is so different than it used to be. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think a lot of people are trying to differentiate ways to acquire customers outside of social media because it was just the easy button for so long. And that's such a good example of it. And right now, another big trend that we're seeing in retail is resale. So this is the process of, say, I buy something from Clare V, and then a year later, I want to sell it to another peer-to-peer, kind of like on eBay, get credit so that I can then go back to Clare V and buy something new. And, you have the RealReals of the world out there, and what's the Grailed and Poshmark and eBay, and all of those are obviously major players in the area. But now there are vendors in the last 2 or 3 years that are providing the software as a service for retailers to drive this experience themselves. So like we launched that a year ago, and that is now a customer acquisition vehicle for us.
Would you put a Depop in that category?
Yeah, Depop, exactly.
Definitely.
My wife's cousin started a vintage clothing store right off of Polk, I think, Moody Goose.
Cool.
And they just
cool
do
name.
Vintage clothes, or they do, secondhand. It's more of a marketplace. I think like there's anywhere up to 15 vendors that she hosts, and they pay to have some racks, and then they sell clothes, and she gets a cut too. It's a pretty neat business. The markups are pretty high. Like I'll see clothes that like I had as a kid, and I'm like, these Gen Zers are buying it nowadays, and they're like, oh yeah, this is real old. I'm like, I'm real old.
$80 for Jordache jeans.
Oh, yeah.
Totally. But I think what's interesting about that is like the power of a brand, right? The power of a name. Because I think what I've seen too is you have those resale moments where you're paying less, you're still getting a deal, right? And that's serving one consumer. But then there are other brands where actually the resale price of that vintage item, like if you think of Levi's, right? You get a vintage 501 from the 90s. There's a certain like aesthetic or cachet, some sort of like scarcity around that some people are willing to pay up for. And so I think that's been really interesting too, to see like as we start to integrate that into our business model, what does that look like? What types of consumers are we serving? And just the power that brand plays in that story and attracting those consumers.
I totally agree. I think think it amplifies the brand. That's what we're seeing as well. And even when I was doing reference calls for that software at the time, that's all of the brands I spoke to were saying the same thing, that it adds value to the perception of the product when the customer's shopping, knowing that they could resell it and that they're shopping at a place that has product with a high resale value. So it's sort of like rising tide lifts all boats.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, we can go on about that forever. Can we do a little bit about the AI component? So you took a boot camp, Shelby, Python and some machine learning. Could you talk about first the driver, then the experience, and then what you're doing with it at Levi's?
Yeah. If you had asked me even 5 years ago, would I be like in a Python boot camp and working in a role around data science, I would have been absolutely no way.
What was your undergrad?
I did economics and international relations, so foreign policy. But here's the thing. I think I've always been interested in consumer behavior and like why do people do the things that they do. So the psychology part of that, I think that's why I like foreign policy. That's why I like economics. It's very theoretical. And I think throughout my career, that's also why I like retail, to be honest. It's always a really tricky problem to solve. Consumers are very finicky. But in the pursuit of like going and doing this Python bootcamp, it really was just about, this is something new and changing. And in a more traditional strategy analytics role, I felt there was a lot of like opportunity left on the table. And I wanted to be part of what that could look like in the future. And I do fundamentally think a lot of strategy analytics roles are going to change. And I think Python as a language is going to become a requirement moving forward. So I wanted to be part of that. And at the time, this was 2 years ago, but Levi's was sponsoring, you had to apply, but they could sponsor you through an 8-week full-time boot camp. And so I was one of those ones who did apply, and I was selected. And so I got to step out of my job for 8 weeks, and I was in boot camp from 8 to 4 every day. And I learned a ton. One thing I learned is I don't want to be a data scientist. I didn't have that intention going into it, but I also hadn't really considered the product management track. And so when I graduated from the boot camp, kind of went back into my old role, I started talking to just my network within Levi's, trying to understand what those opportunities could look like, what types of roles were open at the time. And I'd been doing a lot of work in pricing and promotions, and they were opening up a new product role for that to help us build those algorithms. So
was it convenient timing for the boot camp to end and that role to open?
Definitely. It was very serendipitous, like looking back. It just happened to be good timing. But it's funny how, all the dots start to connect, right? Yeah. I had been working on more of the strategy side of pricing for quite some time before boot camp. And then we started making this larger push into machine learning and building out like true product team to support that work. And so it just happened that I had been doing a lot of the work, knew a lot of the players on that side of the business. And so it definitely was serendipitous.
Yeah, we talked a bit about organizational buy-in and friction of a transformation, digital AI transformation in this case. Can you talk about what you're using AI for and the challenges?
Yeah, we're using it for a lot at Levi's, and I think we've shared a lot of it publicly too, so definitely go and read some of those articles that are out there. Like I said, so pricing and promotions, one area. If you think about our jeans and how we sell all over the world, there's a lot of opportunity to serve consumers differently. And I think especially coming out of COVID, with a lot of supply chain issues, with rising costs of cotton, we had to react. So it definitely forced our hand a bit, and a lot of other brands had to do the same thing. And we tried to figure out how can we do that more efficiently, just be faster to market, make quicker, easier decision making. Right now I'm focused on demand forecasting. So that can be anything from fabric material purchasing and forecasting that. And it's 18 months out, right? Because we have a long go-to-market in the apparel side of this industry. To like unit forecasting at a weekly level for certain what we call planning groups.
And where's the extra money made in using AI versus a traditional forecaster?
So, pure and simple, it's just accuracy, right? You want the right products in the right place, in the right quantities at the right time. And there are so many decisions that have to go right for that to happen. And, on one part, I would say, demand forecasting is one component of that. You also have to think about size, right? Because you buy X number of units of a 501 jean, But if you don't have it in the right sizes, it actually doesn't mean anything, right? You're not serving the right consumer if you don't have that product in their size. So that's a whole nother work stream. And then think about, you got to get the product from the factories and into your distribution centers. And then you got to allocate that inventory to your stores, your online centers, your wholesale partners, again, at the right time, so that they can put it on their shelves at the right time for that promotion, that event, whenever they're driving traffic. So there's a lot of cross-functional work that needs to happen for us to do our jobs effectively. So we're just one component of that, but definitely accuracy is the play. When you think about business at scale, even a 1 percentage point improvement in accuracy, that has a big dollar value assigned to it. So.
Switching gears, let's do a little early life. Stephanie, as far back as you want, kind of what I want to tease out is like how you got into your career field. So any formative kind of experiences leading up to it, and then the journey through college, early, like 25-year-old Stephanie.
Okay.
Yeah, however you want to tell it to where you are right now.
Yeah, I mean, I started in retail because I worked in retail in college, or actually in high school. My first job was at Old Navy when I was 16 years old, which is the youngest you can be to work at a retailer, just after school. And I worked there for 8 years. And I would say that experience was probably the reason I'm in retail, because it's an incredible company culture. They invest so much in people development, soft skills development, and just creating growth trajectories for people that maybe didn't even know they wanted to work in this industry. I still take a lot of inspiration from that experience. And I actually went to college to become a television news producer.
I could see that.
Which is kind of hilarious in hindsight. I could still see it too.
Right here's the tie back.
Yeah, a lot of what I do is still very producery. But it just wasn't for me. The rinse and repeat news cycle wasn't dynamic or challenging enough. And so I moved to New York, went to Parsons for marketing, and got into the corporate side of retail and e-commerce. That was when I started in e-commerce, and just worked my way up job by job. And I was pretty strategic with how I was moving through jobs, like started with a small founder-based company, but then started moving to larger companies, then larger companies and larger companies, because I just wanted to see how an ocean liner operated versus, a little paddle boat and just understand what it looks like to scale from zero to, however many billions. And then the last company I worked at was Hudson's Bay, and I think that gave me enough insight to say, okay, I'm ready to go back to the brand side, and I really wanted to focus on people management. That's kind of the favorite part of my job, so that's how I landed back at Clare V, just to be able to build and run a department. But it was Old Navy, and the best boss I've ever had was actually at Old Navy. I still think, what would Teresa do today?
I feel like there's this perception of most retail or blue collar work, like I kind of lump them too unfairly together, but the commonality is that there's not much upward trajectory. It sounds like it was the opposite for you. Can you describe that 8 years and why it was so positive?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's because I just kept looking for opportunity. I work very hard. So I say that as a positive and a negative. And so everywhere I've ever worked, I've been keen to understand what's next and lean into it without presuming that it would be given to me first. So like, oh, that's an interesting area. I'd like to know more about that in the business. And can I work on this project? Can I work on that project? I'm big about volunteering for additional work to learn and prove that I could develop that skill set. And honestly, I think just that one thing alone has helped me kind of move and zigzag into other areas. I will say it's a challenge just because I do manage a retail department. Upward trajectory is tough. We have some superstars on our team that I never want to leave the company, but there's only so much that we can provide to them within the bounds of our retail operation. Anytime something comes up on the corporate side, we have people in mind. There are so many people in my HQ department that I've pulled from stores or moved over here, or just given net new opportunities. Like our head of customer service used to be a store manager, and now she's running an e-commerce customer service team, just as an example. Our product manager used to be the West Hollywood store manager. So we're training on the job, but I think we can do that because we're a small company. We can take those kind of risks and the time to train and develop those people. But it is tough. It is tough to do that. But I think you have to look at the overall vision of how am I adding to this person's life, and you're building skill sets for that person in their life. I think you retain people a lot longer with that approach. They're committed to the company then.
Yeah, it sounds like you had some really good direct managers as well as maybe a really good overarching company culture at Old Navy.
Yeah.
Maybe switching over to Shelby, do you want to do the same?
Yeah. It's funny. I think I've been interested in this industry as long as I can remember. Honestly, I think like, as a little girl, my mom was a great seamstress. And so as kids, we would go to the fabric store, which also now seems so funny. Like, I don't even know if they still exist. But we'd go and pick out patterns, like dress patterns. And she would make clothes for our American Girl dolls. And we get to pick the fabric and everything. And so just from a young age, being able to like be creative in that way with her and then to see that become something, I was just always interested. Honestly, going into college, though, I had the complete opposite. I really thought I was going to move down to D.C., go work on Capitol Hill, go that route. But again, I think there's a tie between what I studied in international relations and economics, and then honestly, the retail industry, which is just you're obsessed by decisions and consumer behavior, just people in general, and why we do the things that we do. So it's a very different problem, right, or a different industry, but I actually think I have a lot of common interest across the subjects. So in college, I ended up going and interning for J. Mendel, which is high-end, think red carpet gowns in New York City. And I hustled my way through a friend of a friend of a friend. And I got an internship that summer. I think it was in PR. And I was like, well, PR is not for me. I was just running samples back and forth and getting coffee. But the next summer, I decided I really wanted to learn more the business side of the industry. So as much as I have an appreciation for the creative sides of it, I just really am fascinated by, again, how things work, how people make decisions, how we then respond to those decisions. So I ended up getting an internship at Tory Burch on the international business side of it, and that's where I ended up for the next 5 years after college and started my career there. But I think similar to what you were saying with the zigzag, for me, it really has always been like, where am I curious and how do I raise my hand? So even at Tory Burch, I remember I was sitting on the international franchise side, so think more like, brick and mortar in stores. And they were opening up a role on the digital expansion side. And this is little, 23-year-old Shelby is like, I'm just going to walk into this VP's office and just introduce myself because I'd met him twice in different meetings and tell him I'm interested in this role and why I want to do it. And I pumped myself up. And I literally went up to this guy's office, our VP of digital at the time, still one of my mentors today. Shout out to Alex. And I was like, I want to work for you. This is why. And this is why I want to do this job. And it didn't happen overnight. I mean, it took a couple months of additional conversations, figuring out what that meant. But it ended up working. And I ended up another couple of years working with him and growing our business in Japan, Korea, mainland China. So it was just such a blast. But I think every opportunity truly has been raising your hand and just announcing that you're curious about something, you want to learn more, and not being scared to say that out loud. I've really benefited from that in my career, and I feel like that's why I've been able to exactly that, zigzag across so many different subject areas and continuously feel like I'm learning and growing.
Yeah, I have a similar story of I didn't walk into a VP's office, but I was at the robotics company I was at before, and we were at a partner event in Quebec, and it was a dinner, and I was like, oh, hey, you also work at Universal Robots. What do you do? He's like, oh, I'm the VP of product management. No, director of product management. And I was like, oh, really? I'm an applications engineer for this company, and I've been here for a little while. And then he's like, yeah, we're hiring. I was like, oh, are you interested? And not immediately, like you said, but a few months later, it was like, hey, like, yeah, we need some more people. We really like you and whatnot. And it was this hustle of kind of like, well, I'm looking for opportunities, and when you have your eyes open, it's just a matter of time, I think.
Yeah.
Stephanie mentioned hard work. You mentioned hustle. What are some other competencies or skills or behaviors you think drove your success for either of you? Open to both of you.
I mean, I already said curiosity, but I really do believe in that.
Yeah.
You know, it obviously takes a lot of hard work and hustle, but I guess as I think of like where I feel like I've been successful, or even as I look at my team members, whenever they come to me with like random questions and they're like, hey, I was doing this and I was thinking about these other couple applications that I know it's not part of what we're doing, but I think this is kind of interesting. I just find like I learn so much from them and I'm always inspired by them. And that's something I just feel like has helped me in my career. And then I see like my team do it. I'm like, yep, that's exactly it. Because they bring so many great ideas to the table. But I think curiosity drives me a ton.
Yeah.
And I think that's such a valuable skill to have. Like keep that childlike mentality. Like,
Yeah, I
don't get
agree.
stuck in a rut.
Another one that I don't know if it's just because of how much people management I've done, but I think an ongoing theme for me in my whole career has been assume positive intention, or maybe kindness could be another way to put it simply. Like it's just you're working your butt off constantly, especially in retail. Retail is hard work, especially if you're in the operations side. And you got to do it together and you got to do it with your team. And everyone's got to love being there or it just crumbles. So I think assuming positive intent has been just really big for me, you know?
Yeah. Segue to, skills, right? We're in a pretty prestigious MBA program. Maybe it'll be 3 questions you can kind of answer together. Whoever wants to go first. What was the application process like? And how did you decide to apply? What are you trying to get in the program and what are your plans after? So a little before, during, and after.
Big question.
You want to go? I can go.
You can go first.
Okay. I've been thinking about it for years. I think back when I first moved to LA, I would have been about 33-ish. And I did all that research rounds, the MBA conferences and all the things, to figure out, okay, where am I going to go? What school am I going to go to? And then, to be honest, I just talked myself out of it. It's like, it's a huge expense. What are you doing? I started researching. What job do you want? What's your end goal? Why are you even doing this? And I just completely talked myself out of it. And then the thought just kind of lingered. I've always been hungry, talking about curiosity. I've always felt this strong desire, this like pull to just get back into school. And so I looked at a couple of other avenues as well. I've always done some form of continuing education, like whether it's learning a new craft or sewing or quilting or psychology classes. Like there's always just something that I've been trying to learn in some form. And for this round, I just decided maybe I don't need a reason. Maybe I just want to do it. And what do I want the second half of my life to look like? And if I really want to do this, why wouldn't I do it? I'll figure out all the outcomes later. I'll figure out the ROI later. I have a lot of interests and I know that I will be curious enough to dig into the experience and, make something come of it. So that's it. I'm pretty much here with a totally open mind and just curiosity to learn about new field or maybe new aspects within my current field as I'm learning from Shelby. So we'll see. I mean, also things like public policy really interest me. I don't know why. So we'll find out at that immersion week in DC. But that's it for me.
Yeah. That your story resonates so much with me too. I took the GMAT about 6 years ago with so many intentions. I still lived in New York at the time, and I was like, I think I just wanted to change, to be honest. So I took the GMAT, and I didn't do as well as I would have liked, and I just talked myself out of it. I never did anything with it. I never took it again. I never applied, even just to like shoot my shot, and I always regretted it. And, I think like two big things really led me to this decision and why I'm here now. But one, going through the boot camp, it got me back into that student mindset. And I just started thinking to myself, ooh, like, I like this. I like learning again. I like feeling challenged again. It's kind of like an experience I hadn't felt in quite a long time, just very different from work. And two, my grandmother, who passed away about almost 2 years ago exactly, was just one of my biggest inspirations. And she just, I don't know, she did everything like against the grain. She just, yeah, my idol. But I was in the hospital with her as she passed away. It was just the two of us because of COVID restrictions. And I was talking to her, and, you know, it's like, oh, Grams, any regrets you have from, you know, anything or good moments, whatever. We started talking. She goes, no.
Wow.
And I'm like, classic, my grandma too, zero regrets. But she's like so authentic when she says that, because she really just went for it. She was so fearless. And she always pushed my sister and I to be the same. And it was truly, you know, the month after she passed away, I was like, I'm going to go back. I'm retaking the GMAT, and I'm going to apply. Regardless of what my score is, I'm applying. And that led me down this path. And being in San Francisco, I really only focused on this program. One, because it's such a wonderful program, it's convenient. But two, I just met the people, and I was like, this is a done deal. Like, if I can get in here, I'm going to be so thrilled. So in terms of like what I want out of it, to be honest, so similar to Stephanie, it's like, I'm just here for that experience. I didn't want to have that regret. And really just open to getting to know everyone and all sorts of different aspects of different industries, how they work, and either be able to apply that in what I'm doing now, or maybe one day like start my own version of something.
Yeah.
So
I love how both answers were very non-business oriented. You know, there's no ROI in mind.
no.
And I guess Haas is kind of the business school to have that kind of mindset, or that kind of direction. Do you guys have any questions for each other?
Oh gosh.
This is the first 2 interviewee podcast we've done.
That's true.
I should have thought about that.
I don't know. I didn't prepare anything.
I have, I guess I would consider them personal questions for you. Not like Shelby personal, but I was thinking of some questions. I was like, oh, I need to talk to Shelby about that just for work stuff. Yeah. I don't know if that's what you mean.
Yeah.
I was so curious how, just how it actually works in your role if you're not doing the forecasting, right? You're delivering the data set to the forecasters. Is that what's happening?
So, yeah. So I have a team of data scientists and engineers that I work with. And we basically are building these algorithms that then can predict for X, Y, Z. And what we're doing is that we're then serving that up to our planners and our business partners in, you know, either a front-end application format or in Excel. It really depends on like what we're doing and what we're solving for. But what I will say is that I actually think just delivering data is quite meaningless. And especially with something like machine learning, it's a new algorithm, right? So it's really hard to do it well. Like if you start to think about what goes on in the mind of a planner when they're forecasting 12 months out, there are so many nuances that they consider. And they're thinking outside the box. They're going to push their boundaries because they have an emotional reaction to something here, or they're going to pull back a little here based on some strategic conversations with their, you know, retailer or whatever account partner. So it's like, how do we code that? And I think that's really challenging. So we have a ways to go, but I don't feel confident yet to just give them a data set and say, run with it. Right. So we do a lot of, like in my role, I do a lot of workshopping and partnership, like communication around what goes into this, what we still have opportunities to incorporate moving forward, what we think you can use, what we don't think is quite there yet, but really try to like handhold it a bit as we start to like develop and flex that muscle.
Yeah. Are they using any other tools in the meantime, or are they solely relying on this data?
No, I mean, if you think about it, like if we weren't here, they would just be in Excel doing what they've always done, right? So they always have that to fall back on. And we have other enterprise tools that we use from a process flow standpoint. But otherwise, you know, I would say it's a mixed bag. Like some people are more resistant than others. I think sometimes technology and change can be scary. And so I feel like that's the other part of my job is the change management around that too. How do you help them understand like what can be supportive for them, but also like be there to recognize that like they're a person and this is fundamentally changing the way they do their job and potentially how their job looks like moving forward. So there's like a lot to unpack there.
Yeah, we're going through that, or we will be going through that here with the tech stack changes that I mentioned, because we're so used to working with a siloed, non-integrated system, and there's so many precious, delicate workflows tied to just not missing a beat in this environment. That it's going to be interesting as we embark on the next leg, because I do think probably at least 40 or 50% of the effort will be change management and just business process design. And it's interesting.
Yeah, it's the classic robots replacing people, but
Totally.
those people aren't being quite replaced. They just have a different job now, interacting with the robot, in this case, an algorithm that's optimized, right?
Exactly. I'm just curious. So on your side, I guess as you think about like transformation, change, incorporating technology, digital components into your day-to-day life, like where are you on that path? Is that an area where you're focused in like investing in? Is that like we got to get the fundamentals right before we pivot? Or are you actually an early adopter? Like sometimes I find the smaller companies, younger companies, they just inherently have that skill set because that's just was kind of part of the status quo when they grew up, versus an old company like a Levi's where it's like we have to do a lot of transformation to catch up. I'm curious where you're at.
Oh my gosh, I have so many thoughts on this topic. How can I say that in a synthesized manner? First, I'll say, and I wonder if you have experienced the same, I mentioned this in class earlier, but just having worked at many different retailers, the culture is so different. And every retailer I've worked with has a different core competency. So sometimes you work at retailers where tech is at the heart of what they do. Hudson's Bay likes to consider themselves that, and they kind of are, but they're just really quite large. So they're good at many things, but tech is a huge part of the function, and part of how they decide what they're going to do is through a tech lens of, what's the newest, most innovative and efficient way to accomplish this problem, kind of like what you're talking about in your current role. And then there are other brands I've worked at, and I would put Clare V in that bucket, where brand is first. The most important thing that we do as a company is preserve the brand and advocate, the brand and introduce it to new people. And so for us, the priority from a technical perspective just becomes all about fundamentals, like data, step one. This is the message I keep driving home with our cross-functional partners is we can go out and buy any software in the world. It's only going to be as good as the data that we're putting into it. And so keeping it simple in the short run will be wiser for us. Keep the costs low. Let's crawl before we walk. Let's get systems in place that get us from A to B and just get the data to a point where it's really clean. And so I think that's going to be a better way, talking about change management and introducing new technology to, people whose roles will change as a result of it, is just keeping it really simple and, then move on to the more sophisticated things. It is probably our second largest investment, marketing, because we're in growth mode. Marketing is our largest investment, and people, some hiring will probably come neck and neck with our tech investment.
It's funny when you said like keep it clean, keep it simple. I always think of like garbage in, garbage out.
Yep.
Because I feel like I live and breathe that all the time, and I think having clean data is actually just one of the hardest challenges, or having it in one place. And it seems like it should be such a simple like issue to solve, but it's so complex.
Yeah.
But it really is garbage in, garbage out. And you think of like standing up an algorithm or a model, like if you don't have good data to train on, you're not going to get a good result.
Yeah.
And so I think we were obviously not the only ones, but I think every company, whether you're in the retail space or somewhere else, like quality data is so important. So I think it's very top of mind.
Yeah.
What a great discussion. A last question, because we're 9 minutes away from class.
Sorry, Reed.
Who do you want to see next on the podcast? You each get a vote.
Oh.
There's so many cool people in this program.
Maybe someone you haven't talked to as much as you'd like.
Have you interviewed Steve?
Not yet.
I just feel like what he's working on is so interesting. Yeah, he has a big passion for public transportation and just how complicated it is. And it ties back to policy and just the broken network of we have a public service that's available and it's this totally siloed network. And it should just be easier. You know, it makes me think of our data problem. It's like, why is this so complicated? Just get to the fundamentals. So that'd be my vote.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I feel like I have 2 votes.
That's enough. That's good.
So one, I'm trying to think. I feel like Scott would be really interesting. Just his background with the military and also being a pilot, but then doing executive coaching on the side. I feel like every time I talk to him, there's so many layers that come off. And I just feel like he just had a fascinating story to tell. And the other one, I'm going to say Romy, because I love Romy. But he, again, super interesting background. We've bonded because my dad's a patent lawyer. And I always think it's fascinating with patent lawyers, they always have a science background or a computer science, like traditional science or computer science. And then you mix that with law, which is writing, kind of more traditional liberal arts. And I always find that mix to be really interesting. And his career so far has been fascinating too, just going more big law firm to then more technology in-house. And just the types of questions that he comes across each day I find are really fascinating and very timely for like the moment where we're at. Yeah. So those are my votes.
I would love to have Steve, Scott, and Romy on.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard scheduling. Like we're here in between class, so thank you so much for making the time, speeding through lunch.
I feel like we have to have another woman though. What's our other woman? Rep?
Another woman.
We just gave you 3 guys. Got to get the ladies to represent.
We have a lot of very fascinating. We have a lot of women in the healthcare industry, and I think that would be fascinating to talk to, like
Debbie.
Steph or Debbie or Bridget. There's some really interesting work going on in their fields.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that idea.
Cool. Thank you so much. I think that's it.
Thanks.